The preliminary hearing for the murder trial of Celeste Rivas Hernandez has officially wrapped up, and the judge has determined that there is sufficient evidence for David Anthony Burke to be tried on all counts for taking Celeste's life. This is not a guilty sentence just yet. It simply means that all the evidence the prosecution team has laid out thus far was enough to have convinced the judge that this case deserves a full trial. And the evidence they presented over the last few days has been absolutely mortifying, to say the least. I did a full breakdown of the first 3 days of the preliminary hearing and all the evidence that prosecution displayed then, so I'll leave a link to that video in the description of this one, but I want to start off by diving deeper into the alleged relationship between David and Celeste before Celeste lost her life, and peel back the curtain on the true monster that this man may have been. What's important to remember first is that in prosecutors' initial complaint against David, they claim that LAPD robbery homicide detectives determined that Celeste and David met in January of 2022 for the first time, when Celeste was just 11 years old. At the time, I believe David was 2 months away from being 17. So already, a 16, almost 17-year-old doesn't really have much business communicating online with someone who's 11, but it gets even worse because by November of 2023, prosecutors believe that David and Celeste began an S relationship when Celeste was 13 and David was 18. And during the preliminary hearing, prosecutors had displayed a bunch of text messages that they retrieved from an iPhone that they got when they were doing a raid in David's home. And the messages back and forth between David and Celeste allegedly align very well with the timeline that prosecutors have already displayed. And just a trigger warning, when you keep in mind the age of both parties involved in these text exchanges, this is some of the most disturbing stuff that you will ever read. I'm going to have to omit and possibly even censor a lot of the words in these text messages, but we are going to try and go through every single exchange that David and Celeste allegedly ever had. And then we'll take a look at all the other evidence that prosecutors have displayed so you can see why the judge decided it was appropriate for this case to be taken to trial. So the first conversation between David and Celeste that was presented in court takes place on November 25th, 2023. This aligns with the timeline displayed in the complaint against David, which stated that he began an S relationship with Celeste in November of 2023. Celeste had texted David, "Currently manifesting my time of the month because I refuse to have kids." David said, "Did you miss your date? You should start tracking using Flow. Flow is an app that can basically track your time of the month." He continued by saying, "It's your week. I need to make sure that you're on top of your stuff. You should start tracking." And Celeste said, "If I am expecting a child, I'm not having it." David then sends a link to download the Flow app where she can track her time of the month. And he also said, "It's impossible that you'd be expecting a child because we both did not finish." So you can see already they're discussing having actual relations with each other. About a week later on December 1st, 2023, David texts Celeste allegedly, "I have different names and aliases and stuff though. I go by Trayvon Davis here. All my packages and everything." Celeste says, "Please be joking," and David says, "No." This is extremely disturbing because we know that David had ordered a bunch of chainsaws, burn cages, an inflatable pool, all items that prosecutors believe he may have used in the actual unaliving of Celeste. But they were ordered to his house under the name Trayvon Davis, the very same name that he told Celeste is his alias. And if you followed the David story carefully, you know that David had a lot of different personas and aliases, especially ones displayed in his music, most notably the character Atami, which I believe is the Japanese word for pain. And he used to say that he would use this character as an artistic device to commit crimes like murder, and it would be up to David himself to solve the unalivings of the character that he created in his head. About 3 weeks later, on December 20th, 2023, David texts Celeste, "This stuff was fun as hell." She texts back, "Do I take plan B?" David said, "Take it sober too. If you don't feel any symptoms tomorrow, just take it tomorrow. You have 72 hours. Now, before David even got arrested, there were many rumors circulating online that Celeste may have been pregnant at the time that her life was taken. And as we unpack these text messages, you'll see that the situation may have been even darker than we thought. They were texting again, December 21st. David said, "Why not one band when you deserve 10? And Celeste said, 10? Well, because you asked me 10 times. David said, "It was 6, actually, baby." And Celeste said, "How'd you know?" What's interesting is something that David actually posted to his TikTok about a month after this text exchange. In the text messages, him and Celeste were allegedly talking about David sending her 10 bands, and a month later in January of 2024, he posted another text conversation, removing the name of course, where someone says to him, "How many racks can I have? Give me 10 bands right now," and he sends 9,000. Also captioning the post, "I can't stop falling for her." Now in January is where things seem to start getting dark. On January 8th, 2024, there was an alleged interaction between David and Celeste where David said, "I'm sorry again, baby. I don't ever want to put you through this." Celeste says, "No, it's okay. Don't worry. Both of us are not able to take care of it." David said, "I know, but still." She said, "Don't worry about it, my love." He says, "You're so much stronger than me, baby. I love you." She says, "I love you more, my love. It's okay. Don't worry. Neither of us are capable of watching and taking care of the baby." David says, "Yeah, I know. When are you going to get it done?" She says, 2 days. David says, "Also, my mom always told me to ask this if I was in this situation. It's mine, right?" She says, "Of course, David." David replies by saying, "I know, baby. I just want to ask so that I don't feel like a complete blank for her." Now, this is so disturbing and sad on so many different levels because not only does this seem to imply that they were going through an abortion, but with what David was saying, you can almost draw the assumption that his mother may have known about what was going on at the time. And later in this video, you'll see even more evidence to possibly prove that. The next day, they speak again. David asks her, "Wait, the appointment's at 9, no?" 9:30. David said it should take 45 minutes. Then he asks, "How did it go?" Celeste says, "About to be done, like in 10 minutes. Celeste also asked David if she can put concealer on the tattoo yet. And we know that both of them had shush tattoos on their finger. And both of them even allegedly had tattoos of each other's names on their bodies. Here's where it gets even more insane. On February 11th, 2024, they have a conversation where it seems like David is preparing Celeste to pack her things and secretly leave her home when her parents are not aware, and David, along with his security guard, would be in hiding, waiting to pick her up and bring her to David's home in time for Valentine's Day. Celeste seems scared. She seems confused, unsure if she should go through with this, but David is persistently convincing her. They also discuss something that they call Operation Awesome, and judging by the previous text messages we've already reviewed, we know what type of operation that they were preparing for. David says to her, "I see you on the 14th for Valentine's Day. 15th is the operation." Celeste says, "K." He says, "What the F? Operation Awesome is going to be so hard." David says, "Hard as in it's going to be hard to do, or hard as in full Balenciaga fit type of hard?" Celeste says, "I don't know what to bring." David says, "We've been through this for weeks. Anything that you use or can't replace immediately, you bring. Clothes you like, makeup, jewelry, shoes." Celeste asks, "How am I going to bring it though? I don't have anything to bring it in." David says, "I'm giving you 2 different duffel bags when I see you." Celeste replies, "I don't even get half of what I want to bring in the bag. I can't carry it. I'm too small." David says, "For Valentine's Day or for Operation Awesome?" Celeste says, "For Operation Awesome." David says, "Do you want me and the security guard to hide out somewhere and help you bring your stuff to the car?" Celeste says, "Oh my gosh, no. That's so embarrassing, dude." David convinces her, saying, "Baby, this is the most important day of your life next to the wedding, and you're worried about being embarrassed. We're not live streaming. We're beating our phones back and getting the F out of here. Don't overthink it. Stop overcomplicating it." David also says, "I'm about to go finish the phone stuff and add service," which seems to be almost implying that they're about to, when he says beat up their phones, basically like break their phones, break the phone that Celeste now has, and he's going to give her another one. Because remember, she's 12 or 13 at this time, about to run away from home, so she has to use a different phone. Then Valentine's Day comes around, and there's more coordinating to do to get Celeste out of her home. David says, "So explain to me what you want to do. I'll tell security stop at the stop sign and you run out and make multiple trips out to the car." Celeste says, "Hell no. Just tell him get to the stop sign." David says, "So how are you going to carry the heavy bag?" Celeste says, it's not going to be heavy if it's that small. David says, no, you're supposed to use the duffel bag I got you and what you used last time. If that's bigger, just use that. He's basically implying that she's ran away from home to be with him before, and you'll see why that's important very shortly. But she continues, I literally don't have anything to pack with. I got a tote bag. David says, why didn't you tell me then? F it, I'll get you your third Birkin bag. Why didn't you ask me for a bigger bag? You can't pack in that little bag that you have. Celeste says, all my stuff fit in the bag. And David says, me and my security will be there at 11:50 p.m. My love, I've asked you 1,000 times. Are you ready for this? Celeste says, yes. This would be around the first time that missing person photos would go up in Lake Elsinore of Celeste by her family members. It wasn't the first time she ran away, but it was the first time where you can actually find a missing person photo of her online that they were posting. Because she was reported as a missing child, in the complaint against David, they actually detail how during this time period when these text message conversations were going down and David was planning on picking her up with his security guard, detectives had actually paid a visit to David's home, asking if he knew where she was. In the complaint, it says, detectives learned that the victim had been reported missing to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department by her family, who lived in Lake Elsinore, in February and April of 2024. Again, around the same time when she's allegedly texting David about sneaking out and getting in a car with him and his security to go to his house. Riverside County Sheriff's Department telephonically contacted David on February 17th, 2024, again 3 days after Valentine's Day when he allegedly picked her up, after they identified a phone number in Celeste's phone records that belonged to David. During the call, David claimed that he had spoken to Celeste last on February 13th or 14th of 2024, but he stated that he was unaware that she was an A minor or that she had been reported missing. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department advised David that Los Angeles Sheriff's Department deputies would be coming to his home. The LA Sheriff's Department did a welfare check at David's home. They went to his home at 8:15 p.m. that night and informed him that Celeste was 13 and a runaway. David again claimed he was unaware that Celeste was an A minor and that he had only met Celeste once in person in November of 2023. However, David showed deputies a yearbook photo of Celeste he had on his cell phone. Although he claimed to be unaware of where the victim was at the time, Celeste returned home 2 days later. Despite being informed by law enforcement that Celeste was only 13, David continued to pursue her. After Celeste returned home in February 2024, her parents took her cell phone away. David drove to Lake Elsinore and paid a junior high school student in Celeste's class $1,000 to give Celeste a cell phone that David had purchased so that they could stay in contact. Throughout 2024, Celeste spent a significant amount of time with David, including summer weekends at his home in the Hollywood Hills and traveling with him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas to meet his family. Now, going forward, there's going to be a lot of stuff that I just refuse to read to you guys in terms of text conversations between David and Celeste. There was about a 5-month gap between February of 2024 and June of 2024 where we don't get any text message conversations between them. Again, this is when prosecutors allege that Celeste's parents took her phone away and David paid a high school student in Celeste's school to give her a new phone so that they could stay in contact. And this is really where the conversations escalate to be about much more intimate things, to say the least. Now, I do want to show you guys a couple important text messages because they're in reference to the whole Operation Awesome thing, right? The procedure Celeste was allegedly preparing for to remove her and David's baby. Between June 10th and 13th of 2024, Celeste texts David, what if the first procedure to remove a child did not work? David says, you would have had a baby bump. You had hella times of the month since then. What are you smoking? Celeste said, we need to record everything we do for when we don't see each other. David agreed. Celeste said, you deserve the best HEAD in the world. And he said, you deserve better. Again, I don't want to get into all the intimate related conversations, but I do just want to highlight how Celeste was here questioning the efficacy of the procedure that she had done to remove her child. And as the months progress and the text messages continue, she only begins to question not just the efficacy, but also the ethics and morality behind going through with a procedure like that at such a young age and this relationship with David in general. Now you can see here's where the conversation starts getting a lot more manipulative on David's end. The idea of filming explicit content is suggested, and David says, we'll do it August 11th to the 17th in Vegas at the Trump Hotel. And like I showed you guys in my previous video, prosecutors had actually shown proof of David booking flight tickets for Celeste to travel around the world with him. And you'll see why that's so much darker later in this video. But as you see in these text conversations back in June of 2024, he's already suggesting that in August they would start taking trips together to Vegas. She clowns him for booking such an expensive hotel, and David replies, "I can't wait to move in together without cops basically snooping around. I'll see you more and take you out every day." Celeste said, "I miss you so much." And David said, "You're going to be with me everywhere. 4-year vacation. Slide back, get the rest of your documents, and we get married in Italy and dip out the country. After all these OAs, aka Operation Awesomes, we can finally make it happen without all these police and posters." The posters he's talking about are all the missing person posters that were being plastered around Lake Elsinore when Celeste had run away, allegedly to David's house, and her parents did not know where she was. And you can see in these texts that Celeste begins to get more and more scared. She says, "I keep getting symptoms as if I'm expecting another child. I don't like this." David says, "It's okay, LMAO. We don't know for sure. Let's let this operation be our last one until we have the real one. And if you're actually expecting a child, we have twins, then cool. We wanted to. Anything more, and it's going up for adoption. We have a clear vision on how we want to build our family, right? I also got other business credit cards approved for you to use. So whatever you buy is a tax write-off in LA. Clothes, food, whatever you want, you can buy." She sends a jewelry emoji. David says, "I just don't want no more missing person posters, and you got to be able to get on planes. I can pay for you. Sorry, I can pay you and give you a credit card so you don't have to worry about the money part." So as you can see here, David is clearly manipulating Celeste to spend the rest of her life with him, to travel everywhere with him, to get married, have kids. He'll get her a credit card. She can buy whatever she wants. Meanwhile, these texts show that she's scared and regretting the operations that she's already had to go through at such a young age. The next day, they discuss posting pictures of each other on Instagram and debating whether they should or not, because obviously, again, David can't be caught affiliating himself with Celeste. So she said, "Should I add one of these into the post?" David says, "It's between this emoji or that emoji, or this because the girl's name is in the background too." She says, "Pick the blurry one though." David says, "I want to repost. I want to post about you," type of vibe. Celeste said, "Oh, you can't. You can't see my hair there. It's red. Not this person or that person thinking I got straight hair and red hair." David says, "Surely they remember what your hands look like. You're recognizable." Again, she had the same tattoo as David on her hand, on her finger. So by June of 2024, they're being very careful about what they post of each other online. Now, a couple days later is when we get one of the most horrifying texts, I believe, in this entire exchange, when Celeste asks David, "Does your mom know that we had relations yet?" David said, "She thinks that's the first thing we're going to do when we see each other." Celeste says, "I can see you and sleep over. Just don't give me another baby, please." And he says, "We've done a good job the past few months." So as you can see here, Celeste is already showing signs of regret for the operation she went through, and also seemingly implying that David's mom knew about their relationship. Keep in mind, this is months after the LAPD went to David's home and informed him that Celeste was an A minor. Now again, there's tons of other text messages that I'm purposely skipping that show David and Celeste discussing very intimate, vulgar things. I don't really think there's a purpose to review all that stuff, but just so you guys are aware, this entire situation was very inappropriate, judging by these texts. And you can obviously see that by the fact that Celeste went and had that specific operation to remove a child. So at the very least, to think that David will get off on just the charge alone of having relations with an A minor, I'm not sure how in the world his defense is going to fight that one off. In July of 2024, Celeste messages David, "Does anyone know that we even had intimacy? Then let's get married next year and make the baby simply." David said no, and I would like to keep it that way before we're married. Then they continue discussing more intimate things, specifically about doing things in Vegas. Again, David was going to fly Celeste to Vegas in August of 2024. And as you can even see in the complaint against David, prosecutors claimed that throughout 2024, Celeste not only spent a significant amount of time with David, but aside from spending summer weekends at his home in the Hollywood Hills, she also traveled with him to Las Vegas and London and Texas to meet his family. Now, at this point in time, she's nowhere near the age where this should have ever been appropriate, and I can't emphasize enough that David was already warned by authorities of her age in February of 2024. But yet he continued talking to her about marriage, about having children, convincing her they'd share a life together, that he would financially support her. But after that August Vegas trip, things started to get a little turbulent. On the 22nd of August, we get a text from David where he says, "All right, I'm going to say one last thing and leave it on my end. You're enough for me, all I need. Used to come over after 11 p.m. We used to drink, and because of your situation, we couldn't. I was down, but I did. I made the best of the situation. You're everything to me. I only want to send reels and gifts to you. You'll always complain about people who used to be in your life. Don't get too close to other males. We can spend more time together now. Back then, when I could only spend 2 nights a week with you, back then, that was enough." Now here's where you start to see the regret build up on Celeste's end for everything they had already been through. She texts David at 2 a.m. on August 30th, 2024, saying, "Realistically, I care about you, but I took my child off of this earth for you." David said, "It has to be the right time with the right complications." Celeste said, "I still would have been there for the child." David said, "Yeah, selfishly, because also the child would have been mine." Celeste says, "David, I have to lie to people and even lie to my kid for the rest of my life. I would do anything to have the kid back. I still took a life of an innocent literal baby." David said, "Then let's end that there." Celeste said, "I can talk about it without crying. I'm willing to talk about my child." David said, "I don't like talking when you're upset." Celeste said, "How do you feel about it?" And David said, "I'm saddened by it, more sad of how it was conceived outside of marriage and how I pictured it. I can't change it, but I can change for the next child." The next time they spoke would be on Celeste's final birthday, September 7th, 2024. You can see that the interactions focus more and more on her stress behind carrying another one of David's children. And David continues to manipulate the situation and her. September 7th, she says, "I haven't taken a test in a minute." David says, "'Cause you haven't missed your time of the month." Celeste says, "I will take one when I see you." 5 days later, she says, "I'm scared. I haven't got my time of the month in a minute, and we are intimate a lot." David says, "Because we're intimate when you're least likely to conceive a child." And Celeste says, "Okay, I was scared." 10 days later, she asks him nearly the same question, and they have the same conversation. And then there's no communication until November of 2024, where Celeste says, "I literally was intimate with you daily for almost a year straight." And David says, "You treat this like it's the first breakup. It's the 8th time." Now, I didn't have access to any text communication where it showed they were fighting or breaking up, but David's implying here that in this 2 or 3 year time span that they allegedly knew each other, they had already broken up and gotten back together 8 times. In December, they text again, and I'm not going to show you, it's more intimate stuff where basically Celeste regrets that she saw David again since they were supposed to be broken up, but they still were intimate with each other. And David basically ends that interaction by saying, "This happens every time you initiate and I just go with it. You ask me to be your boyfriend, I just follow your lead." In March of 2025, Celeste would basically try and cut David loose, saying, "We can be online friends, but not in person. I just want to move on." David said, "Okay." Celeste said, "This isn't happening. I feel like we can't be in a balanced relationship. Maybe if things were different, but all we do is be intimate and hang out. I want more for myself." David said, "Boundary setting is terrible." Celeste said, "It's more than that." And that concluded all the text conversations back and forth between David and Celeste that the prosecution had showed on day 4 of the preliminary hearing. There was a lot more interactions that we'll get to later in this video that took place on Monday, July 27th, the day that the judge decided this case is going to trial. But in the meantime, I want to take a look at some of the reporters who were actually in the courthouse that day that all these text messages were shown, and show you guys some more info that they had firsthand of that courtroom hearing, other evidence that was displayed, and David's reaction to all of these alleged text messages that took place between him and Celeste throughout all of these years.
This was actually the first instance, Chris, during this preliminary hearing where it seemed to me like David was actively engaged in his own defense. Today was the first time I actually noticed him using the pen or pencil in front of him and that yellow legal notepad that I keep on peeking at, trying to see if he's taking any notes. Before today, I haven't seen him writing anything down, and I've got an eye on him at all times just to see how he's reacting to what's being said about him, his actions. Nothing before today, not a single thing written down. But today, as they were talking about the photos found on his phone and the text messages recovered from his iCloud account, I did notice him hunching over and starting to jot something down. I did notice him having whispered conversations with his attorneys. At one point, this was when, and this was really tough. This was actually what prompted the victim's mother to start crying and both of her parents to walk out of the courtroom, flanked by their attorney. But when they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked out at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down. And I'm really curious what he wrote down. Really curious what he shared with his attorneys during that exchange. Because it wasn't just one photo or two that LAPD Detective Corey Farrell described on the stand. It was a series of photos, probably dozens. You know, it got to a point where there were so many descriptions. They were so explicit. You can see in my notes, Chris, I actually stopped describing them one by one. And I just started grouping them into categories, you know, of genitalia, the two of them engaging in sexual intercourse. The list goes on and on. That portion of testimony went on for much longer than I expected it to. We have not even gotten to cross-examination of this witness yet.
It's very interesting because in my previous video, I showed you guys how David was pretty much expressionless the entire time that the prosecution was mainly detailing the state that they found Celeste's body in the front trunk of David's Tesla. And that really speaks to his character. If this was someone he was truly talking to so heavily for all of these years, right? Manipulating her into being in an inappropriate relationship with him. It's insane to think that when prosecutors were showing him and the judge these pictures of her body completely lifeless in a trunk of a Tesla that belonged to him, his face showed no emotion. But yet, when they start showing these intimate photos and text messages between David and Celeste, that's when he starts showing a reaction on his face. And speaking of Celeste's cause of death, many people wondered why it took so long for prosecutors to not just arrest David, but determine a cause of death. And they actually explained the reasoning for that during this hearing.
There's been a big question about cause of death in this case. We know something horrific happened to this young woman, her body dismembered according to police. What was the piece of information you saw come out of this? Piece of information that came out of this just related to how we know Celeste died at this point?
So there was a lot of buzz around this autopsy that was conducted last fall after the body was found, and it took about 3 months for them to actually release their final findings. And we learned today that's because they had to do some ancillary testing. Essentially, this deputy medical examiner, he was one of 2 people involved in doing the autopsy. They wanted to wait for toxicology testing to come back to confirm that she didn't die from an overdose. They wanted to know that before releasing this report and finalizing their finding that it was, in fact, penetrating injuries, multiple penetrating injuries that killed her. So Dr. Grant Ho, the LA County Deputy Medical Examiner, spent quite a bit of time today describing the injuries he found, describing how the penetrating wounds to the overlying skin are associated with internal damage found inside. That includes damage to the victim's liver, He described how he used his own fingers to palpate her ribs, how he found damage or disruptions to that underlying bone, how that sits right beneath a second penetrating wound that he found on her left flank. So he painted a very clear picture of what happened to this 14-year-old. Now, here's what the defense did with that. It was Marilyn Bednarski leading cross-examination of Dr. Grant Ho this morning. She made it very clear. You may have these findings. You may have this autopsy report. You may have these shocking visuals, but you don't actually know for sure what kind of sharp instrument was used. You don't actually know for sure which penetrating wound occurred first. You don't know for sure if they happened seconds apart. And then defense actually insinuated today during cross-examination of this witness that they don't know for sure if the victim herself may have been holding the knife that stabbed her. There were a couple looks exchanged in the courtroom after Bednarski said that. And after the witness did in fact confirm that no, he does not know due to the advanced state of decomposition of the victim's remains. But everybody looked around. And I think that bordered on absurd to a couple of the people in the courtroom I spoke with during the lunch break. But that's how defense is handling this. These are sharp defense attorneys. They are aggressively doing their job. And I'm so curious to see how they attack this digital evidence from David and Celeste's iPhones when we pick this back up on Monday morning.
Now here's where it gets insanely depressing. And just to think about the added context of all these text messages back and forth, it adds so much weight to how tragic this loss of life truly was. This was a child that was manipulated into being in an inappropriate relationship. This was someone who was visibly distraught at the fact that she went through an operation as traumatic as removing her own child. In these text messages, that seemed to be the cause of a lot of the conflict in their back and forth. And because of the state that her body was found in, it's extremely hard to decipher what actual object was used to take Celeste's life and who it actually was that took Celeste's life. And while there's an insane amount of evidence that links David to Celeste, at least on a personal level, unfortunately in a court of law, that's not enough to concretely say that he was the one who took her life. And you can already see the defense trying to leverage the fact that her body was decomposing for so long and that it's so hard to actually tell what it was that actually took her life. And they're even disgustingly trying to use that as an argument to say, well, we can't rule out that Celeste was not the one to do this to herself.
They decided the cause and manner of death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was homicide, and they attributed her death to multiple penetrating injuries. Here's what's interesting, though. They did not identify what kind of weapon or tool caused those penetrating injuries. And they stopped short of actually calling it a penetrating injury caused by a sharp instrument. So they're not saying that she was definitely stabbed to death. And that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. They simply don't know for sure exactly how or what caused a lot of what they found, which we are looking at right now in the courtroom, documented in these very, very visual exhibits.
Let me tell you why that's so significant. You know, but our audience should know. One of the special circumstance allegations in this case that has been presented by prosecutors is that David Anthony Burke personally used a deadly and dangerous weapon, a sharp instrument, to commit this crime. And yet what you're telling us is this deputy medical examiner can't definitively say that that's the case.
We don't know that for sure. And I think defense attorneys made a point of underscoring that several times. That is one of the elements of this first-degree felony murder charge that is interesting, that is different. And if he is convicted, there could be a sharp instrument enhancement. I believe in the state of California that could tack on an additional consecutive year But those 3 additional special circumstances, that makes this murder case eligible for the death penalty. Here's what else the deputy medical examiner doesn't know for sure. And defense leaned really hard into all of this on cross. They don't know which penetrating injury occurred first. There's one on the victim's abdomen, and there's one on her lateral left chest. So one is associated possibly with liver damage, the other possibly with rib damage and diaphragm damage. Deputy Emmy can't say which one happened first. He can't say definitively whether or not they may have happened seconds apart. He cannot say which one caused her death. He cannot say how long it may have taken Celeste to die from either one of those injuries. There's so much we simply don't know. And that created a gap for one of the defense attorneys to ask something that we have not heard yet in this case. She asked this witness, this deputy medical examiner, if he could rule out that Celeste may have inflicted both of these stab wounds on her own. And he said, based on his findings in this autopsy, that was not something that he could definitively rule out. The reaction in the courtroom following that line of questioning, though, I turned around and I could see a couple people, glancing at each other, eyebrows raised. It looked and felt to me like people watching this line of questioning felt like it may have been bordering on the absurd. It may not be something a jury would believe.
Let's map that out for a second. So in other words, and this is based on what we saw this week from the defense, they are potentially building the argument, if this goes to trial, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Celeste would have come over to his place, something happened, she killed herself or had an overdose, David panicked and tried to get rid of her body. I mean, is that something that you see the building blocks for, even though they've tried to, because remember, one of the most significant things I think the defense has been trying to do is saying, well, all these alleged purchases, the chainsaws, the laundry bags, the body bag, was all after she allegedly died. So it's not like he planned to kill her. Am I understanding that that's maybe the building blocks of where they may go as a potential defense?
Jesse, I don't know if that's where the defense is actively trying to go. I think this is their opportunity during this preliminary hearing to kind of test out different lines of questioning, right? See what sticks. See where the biggest openings might be for them to just create more gaps in the prosecution's case. I don't believe that line of questioning is going to go anywhere. But here's how they laid it out this morning. Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. Then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition precludes a lot of definitive information. The deputy ME simply cannot say how this happened or who did this to her.
So with all this in mind, with us still being unsure of how specifically Celeste lost her life, let's dive into the next day of the preliminary hearing, where prosecutors showed text messages between David and Celeste on the night that Celeste had allegedly been believed to have lost her life. Remember that the last text interaction we saw between David and Celeste occurred in March of 2025, where Celeste had basically told David that they can only be friends online. Well, now we get to April 23rd, 2025. So before we see these text messages, David walked into the courtroom appearing relaxed and in good spirits. He smiled and whispered with his defense attorney, Burke, and at one point he seemingly joked with the courtroom clerk about water. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman resumed Detective Farrell's testimony by establishing that David and Celeste remained in regular contact through mid-March 2025 and exchanged between 8,000 to 9,000 text messages before her passing. Silverman focused on conversations in this hearing from April 22nd to 26th, 2025, which was the time period leading to the loss of Celeste's life. And these messages also included discussion about David's friendship with another woman by the name of Aisha Collins. Beth Silverman then walked through the April 23rd conversation in which David and Celeste coordinated an Uber ride to David's home. The messages showed that David ordered the ride at Celeste's request, confirming the pickup location and tracking the driver's arrival. At 5:07 p.m., David asks, "Why do I have to show you everything I get?" Celeste says, because I had your baby in me." Celeste says, "Get an Uber, queen." David said, "Getting it." Celeste then texts David the name of the street that her family was living on at the time to call the Uber to. David tells her the Uber is 1 minute away, then says the Uber's here. Then at 8:39 p.m., Celeste says, "Okay." Then says, "Girly pop, I'm almost there. Open your door if you're home." David says, "I got you." And at this point in the courtroom, there's no emotion, no movement from David. At 10:10 p.m., David says, "The gate is open, the door is unlocked." And at 10:31 p.m., David says, "Uber said you're here. Where you at?" This is where it gets dark. After this, David repeatedly texted Celeste, asking where she was. His final messages were sent around 11:41 p.m. that night. The prosecution then shifted to digital evidence. Detective Farrell testified Uber records showed that the ride actually arrived to David's home at 10:10 p.m. Prosecutors also introduced evidence regarding cell phone movements, David's Tesla, and a photograph of the Tesla's navigation screen showing Santa Barbara destinations, including Lake Cachuma and a Tesla supercharger in Santa Ynez. And remember that Celeste's ID, her driver's license, had been found by a random bystander in Santa Barbara very shortly after this. Then it was David's defense team's turn to question all the text messages, all the evidence that the prosecutors had presented. His lawyer had established that through text message conversations, Celeste had represented herself as both 16 and 18 at different times, and noted that the defense had prepared their own compilation of raw iCloud message data. Basically, aside from all the text messages that the prosecutor showed the judge during these hearings, David's defense team also had other messages between David himself and Celeste that they also wanted to show in defense of David. And with that included some conversations that took place between April 22nd and 23rd, pointing to messages where Celeste threatened to unalive David and ruin his music career, contact his mother, leak damaging information, and spread information to people in his personal life. And the detective had agreed that those messages did exist. David's lawyer then questioned the detective about the extent to which David and Celeste's relationship was known to other people before April of 2025, when prosecutors believe her life was taken. The detective testified that Celeste's parents, her relatives, her friends, and David's mother were all aware of their relationship. The detective also confirmed that David attended church with Celeste's family, spent time with them at malls and amusement parks, and that Celeste's parents signed a notarized travel consent form allowing David to take Celeste to London in September of 2024. This was all found through text message evidence. The detective also testified that Celeste attended Coachella and David's performances with people in David's inner circle.
Do you think the family is as quiet as they are because they knew who David was and they knew who she was going to, and you don't really see too much of an intervention between them.
I mean, yes, I have proof that family members have been to that rental house before. Have been with David and Celeste.
Wait, her family has been to his house?
Family members. Listen, one of the first things I put down in this case was a build. We know that David and Celeste were at Six Flags on a certain date, and we found a Build-A-Bear certificate from the Build-A-Bear place in Six Flags in her cousin's name at the house. You know, and so it's like, wait a minute. So she wasn't really missing. You know what? You want to know, in my opinion, what the missing persons report was about? It was to cover their ass so CPS didn't come in and say, "Hey, she's not going to school. What's up?" If she's a missing person, you say she's not going to the school because she's a missing person. You know, then you don't have CPS in your life at that moment. You know. Listen, I sympathize. I know that they're grieving. I know they lost a daughter, but goddamn, like she shouldn't have been allowed to be. She was gone a year and a half, man. A year and a half. Like somebody should have said, you know, maybe we shouldn't be letting Celeste live her own life like this.
David's lawyer then seemed to be insinuating that Celeste was abusive towards David, pointing to one of the messages that was sent from David to Celeste, saying, "Oh my gosh, I will unalive you. She was in my damn seat. I will tell my dad so many freaking lies about you, and I will end your career and your life. I will damage anything." David's team also focused into Celeste's arrival at David's house because there's a lot of questions there that are left unanswered. The detective testified that investigators determined David was playing a virtual reality game with other people while Celeste was traveling in the Uber on the way to David's house. He also agreed that there were no eyewitnesses who saw Celeste exit the Uber or enter into David's property. There was no surveillance video showing either Celeste or David outside the home, and no witness who observed what occurred during the roughly 20-minute period that investigators believe encompassed Celeste's passing. The detective also further acknowledged that the Uber driver who drove Celeste to David's home allegedly had no independent recollection of the ride and could not confirm the exact time that she was dropped off. So all in all, David's defense wrapped up their arguments by saying that prosecutors had not proven the three quote-unquote special circumstances that can make the alleged crime more serious. Number one, lying in wait. Celeste allegedly chose to come over while David was gaming with friends, so the defense says there is no proof that he planned a surprise attack on her. Number two is financial gain. There is no clear evidence that he acted to protect his future music career or to save himself from getting prosecuted if she went to authorities and revealed that he was in a relationship with her. No evidence, all speculation. Number three, killing a witness. There is no evidence that Celeste threatened to report him to the police. Overall, the defense said that the case relies only on indirect evidence and does not clearly show what David was doing when Celeste was allegedly unalived. But the prosecutor began arguing the exact opposite, saying that all three circumstances were actually connected. Number one, when it comes to lying in wait, even if Celeste arranged the meeting, aka, coordinated the idea of going to David's house, she did not know what David allegedly planned. Prosecutors say that he expected her arrival and deliberately put her in a vulnerable position. In terms of financial gain, Celeste allegedly threatened his rapidly growing multi-million-dollar music career. Prosecutors argue that silencing that threat protected his image and future earnings. And number three, unaliving a witness. Celeste had allegedly threatened to expose their relationship. The prosecutor says that David unalived her to prevent a report that could have led to criminal charges, even though no case existed at that point. The prosecutors basically believe that Celeste, with growing anger and resentment towards David, had threatened to reveal that they had been in a relationship to the world and to authorities. And that would, of course, compromise David's lucrative music career. And because of that, he agreed for her to come over. And when she did, he unalived her with the intention of keeping her silent so that his secret wouldn't be exposed to the world. And with that, the judge said, this thing is going to trial. Thankfully, the much-deserved justice and closure for Celeste's family will have the chance to be attained in a court of law. Rest in peace to Celeste.
Okay, so I've just come back out of the courthouse. We've heard some more of the messages that were sent after the previous session, which were pretty bad, okay, but we now have seen the text messages between David and Celeste right up until the moment that she actually was invited to his house and sent there in an Uber and allegedly lost her life at the hands of David. Now, what was very, very interesting was we kind of heard this report of a very tense back and forth where she basically threatened to expose him. Now, what's crazy about this, I personally don't think it's right to victim blame anybody. So I'm definitely not supporting anybody that's saying that by any means she created the situation where this happened or that she deserved this. But what was said in court that was very interesting was that they had gone back and forth. They had had a massive argument. And what was crazy, they had apparently had a back and forth where Celeste was jealous about David's friendships, or more than friendships potentially, with other people, including Asia. Now, there was apparently a message from Celeste that said, but can you tell me why you want to be friends with Asia? And David said, oh, she's a friend of mine. And then she's basically saying, oh, you keep bumping into her. There's no need for friendship with her. She was basically jealous, and they went back and forth. And she'd said to him, oh, you really end our friendship just to be friends with her over me. It's disturbing and disgusting on a deeper level. It's actually crazy. Celeste even said to her, like, oh, you know, I've known you for years. You've only known Asia for a year. I don't want to be friends with you if you're still going to be friends with her, which is insane. Now, what is also interesting is kind of after that, they went back and forth, and Celeste was basically very jealous of Asia, basically said, why was she at your house? And David was like, oh, she only came to my house to get Coachella wristbands. There was a good reason everyone was at the house. Basically, I'll keep it real with you. Look, I'm just going to tell you what she said. This is insane. I can't even believe I'm letting you guys know this. But they were having this big back and forth argument about Asia. And then Celeste basically said, this is what I've written down, all right? Said, oh my God, I swear to God, I will kill you. I couldn't believe it. They said she was in my seat. I guess she was sat in the seat of the car that Celeste usually sits in. She said, I will kill you. I will shoot you and tell my dad so many lies about you and end your career and do so much damage. And then went on to say she posted at your house, you weirdo. So that was like that was, I believe, the day before the alleged murder. And then the following day, like, they kind of squashed it. And basically, apparently, Celeste had kept saying to David, I want to see you in person. I want to see you in person. And then he basically said, okay, come round. I'm going to send an Uber for you at like 8:39. Ended up sending the Uber, and she was delivered to his house. David actually replied to that saying, you've turned this into a bigger thing than this conversation, and basically said, this is how it goes with you. You have to find out after the fact that you don't listen to me. It was a bit of a weird response to that, but that's what was going on, is that basically she kind of allegedly threatened to kill him, to expose him. She also said, basically she said, nah, I don't play like that. I don't even play like that. I'll go to Val's door on some crazy knocking and crying. So she basically said she was going to expose him. She said she was going to put it out there that he had all this crazy stuff going on. And basically, she also said that she had a whole bunch of stuff like on her phone, a whole bunch of dirt on him that she was going to expose. Basically, the defense are trying to pull this defense that like she kind of threatened him and that there was some kind of fear. Maybe she struck fear into David's heart of killing. But the reality is, for Celeste, those were just words. And for David, these were actual alleged actions. And she was the one that was found deceased. So I'm not buying it. I'm not having it. That saying that to anybody. That's definitely wrong to say that. But this is just this is an angry little kid that's just whiling out. There's no excuse, no self-defense argument to be had here. But like I said, the defense are really trying to reach for anything that they could possibly get. And there were a couple more things that looked like they could work in their favor. But I don't think it's enough to justify or explain away the literal of a little girl.